This is Ask the Operators. This is a session we started last year. It was actually Andy Drake's idea to do a session like this last year. I thought it was a really great session last year, and I've been looking forward to this one. I think it's a good, bookend along with the community voices that opened up the panel, opened up the conference, excuse me. And so, last year we talked about integrity management. That'll, I'm sure, come up again today. But really, we wanted to talk about, an issue I brought up this morning on the overall trend of incidents. We have some industry leaders here. We have really each of the kind of major systems represented. We have gas transmission, hazardous liquid, gas gathering, and gas distribution. And we really want to talk about, are we making progress on pipeline safety? I'll say this morning on my remarks, I really wanted to, my plan was, to talk about our origin as an organization, to show that we still have a lot of work to do, and then inspire some hope for the future. But I have to say, I hadn't really shared the Bellingham story in such detail before, in front of such a large group before, and I was surprised by how much it got to me. And I couldn't pull out that kind of inspiring thing at the end, and so I apologize if that felt, low energy and ending on a down note, but hopefully we can, the group that we have here and all the different stakeholders, all of us agreeing to, get out of our comfort zones and our bubbles and have these difficult conversations, it does inspire me, and hopefully we get some inspiration there. So I want to give each of the panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves and talk about how they're connected to pipeline safety, their organization, and who they're representing. Yeah, we can go down the line.
All right. My name's Andy Drake. I have been with Enbridge about 42 years in the gas pipeline industry. I have been vice president of several different aspects, particularly in the technical services, engineering, operations, and integrity management sectors. I also have served as the ASME chair of the integrity management development document that was incorporated by PHMSA as Section O in the code. And I think that may fit into some of these comments about where we're going as well. So I'll pass that on to you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I hope you're all having a great day. As Bill mentioned, my name's Matt Isom, and I represent Plains All-American Pipeline, here to speak about the hazardous liquids portion. In my role, I'm the Vice President of North American Engineering. Within that function, I have asset integrity, project execution, and our project services groups. Plains operates approximately 18,000 miles of pipe. We have almost 4,000 employees across the United States and Canada. Something that's not in the bio is I did grow up in the field as well in a small West Texas town. So I'm very passionate about what we do, and I'm very passionate about keeping our assets safe. I think hopefully after today some of that will show, and we will be uncomfortable probably, but I think it's going to be a great day. So thanks, Bill.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Morton, and I'm with Enterprise Products. I'm the Senior Director of our Transportation Compliance. And what that really means is my team is responsible for the compliance with both the gas and the liquid pipeline safety regulations. I participate in multiple industry organizations, including API. I was a team member of RP 1185 that we've talked about during these sessions, member of GPA Midstream's Pipeline Safety Committee, and the Common Ground Alliance. Enterprise Products, we operate a little over 50,000 miles of pipe, a combination of liquids and gas.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Weisker, and I'm responsible for the gas distribution operations for Duke Energy. We operate in 5 states. We're in North Carolina, South Carolina, the Nashville area of Tennessee, and then in Ohio and Kentucky in the southwest portion of Ohio, northern portion of Kentucky, right around the Cincinnati area. Our gas distribution operations, we're really under 2 brands. In the Midwest, Ohio, Kentucky, you'll hear us referred to as Duke Energy. And in Tennessee, South Carolina, and North Carolina, you'll hear us referred to as Piedmont Natural Gas. I've been with the company for over 20 years now, or predecessor companies. We've been quite a few acquisitions throughout the years. I've spent time in our power plant as a plant manager. I've been in our gas operation side now for 6 years. I've done some work within coal ash as well, as the vice president of our coal ash operations and maintenance when we centralized all of that in the mid 2015, 2016 timeframe. And before all of that, I was a submarine officer in the Navy, so I served 8 years as an officer, nuclear-powered submarines, and actually for 2.5 years I lived here in New Orleans. It's good to be back. I taught ROTC at Tulane during my shore duty time frame just down the road from here, so it's good to be back. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks everybody. So as I mentioned, thinking about the trend charts that I went through this morning, and I won't go through them all again in detail, but as you see here, granted this is a pretty kind of crude first look at the long-term trends on incidents without getting in slicing and dicing too much. But we at the Pipeline Safety Trust don't necessarily see a lot of improvement on trends. So I want to ask each of the panelists, you can go in any order that you'd like, are we making progress on pipeline safety in America? Are pipelines getting safer?
I'll start here first. I think, first of all, it's a great question. It's a timely question. We've been working on this a long time. I did want to start with first going back to the safety moment. I appreciate you framing this meeting in the context of the Bellingham incident. I'm sure that was hard, but I think it's really important. It's a powerful reminder why we're here. What are we trying to do? And I think that, I think there is a relentless effort here to constantly get better. And I think, so are we making progress is the right question. I think that in the face of incidents, INGA, the gas transmission group, really formed at the board level a commitment to get to zero, which I think is a common goal for everybody in this room. And it was a challenging conversation. It was an uncomfortable challenge, but I think it was really predicated on how do we go about doing that? So setting a framework around, owning our performance, relentless effort to continuously improve facts and data, deliberate effort to review them, and honestly look at what's driving the performance. And I think that a big piece of that has been these kind of forums. We all see the data differently. We all have a different way of looking at it. And I think it's important to have that exchange and engagement to understand what we think is important. Is that important to you? So we can set appropriate priorities. But to me, I think when we ask the question, is it working? I think it really starts with what is integrity management? What is the scope of integrity management? Incidents is a big basket. I mean, there's a lot of things that are in the incident basket. And I think when we really drive down to that, what is integrity management programs covering? And I think you'll find that there are a lot of incidents that are not covered by integrity programs. And I think we want to really be careful to differentiate those things. If we look at HCA differentiation, I think, can I do this?
Yep.
If we look at HCAs, and this I think is really important, this is just the beginning of a conversation. This is not the end. I'm not trying to say we're done or rationalize why we're not doing this. No, it's just facts and data. This is just things that we see in trends and patterns to inform that next decision, that next prioritization. I think when we look at HCAs, it's relevant because it's where operators are required to deploy integrity management. If we look at HCAs and we look at where integrity management is being deployed, for the last 13 years, 11 of those years, we've had 0 incidents on internal corrosion, external corrosion, and SCC. That's good. That doesn't mean we stop there by any means. It's not the end of that conversation. There's a lot more work to do, particularly as we look at threats that are less mature and we look at management of pipelines outside HCAs, which is not a federal requirement. A lot of operators, ourselves included, deploy integrity management systemically, but it's not required. So a lot of the things I hear in this room is, well, it's interesting that you're doing this, but what's relevant is the person next to me is not. They're not required to do it. And yet that variability in performance is causing a lot of angst because there's no certainty of what they're doing. And I think that really is important precept to the conversation about performance. I think when we look at some of the data, as we get into, breaking down these facts and, and incident drivers, we can see things like geohazards. Okay, well, geohazards don't typically happen in HCAs because people typically don't build subdivisions in land that's that unstable. So they're happening out in class 1s, in remote areas. That's not a reason to not do them. It's just that's not showing up in the incident data for HCAs. So as we expand our purview and we look at just incidents everywhere, geohazards, we see an uptick in geohazards. We see an uptick in hard spots. We see an uptick in some other kinds of cracking problems and third-party damage. You can see that on these sheets. So what we're looking at is, okay, those seem to be issues we need to be putting energy towards. So one of the things we look at is, if you look at the federal regulations, PHMSA's overarching requirement to operators is don't let anything bad happen anywhere, anytime. Okay, well, that's good, noble, not very helpful, but frankly, because you're going to get a lot of different interpretations of that, which causes variability. So you may interpret that one way, I may interpret it differently. You get all that inconsistency. That creates risk, quite frankly, and variable performance. So one of the things we do when we look into those causes is you dive in and you ask the why are we having geohazards? Well, one of the things you find out is there's no specific regulatory guidance on how to manage them. PHMSA says just don't let geohazards happen. All right, that's good to know. But now, what does that mean? So industry puts time and energy, and you heard that yesterday, into developing a standard, doing research and things to help lower the hurdle rate for what is best practice. But that's not a regulation, so people aren't required to do it. So you're still getting a lot of variability in performance, but the standard of care is starting to clarify, and that is helpful. So that's some of what you heard yesterday. It's not the end, it's just a part of a process. And I think there's a lot of work to continue to do there. Where are these immature where are the threat management systems immature? Where can they be standardized, evolved and developed to help improve clarity and consistency? And it's just a prioritization schema, frankly, and it's driven by data. The thing I think when you really look at the data, what I really see is the whole right side of that pie chart is third-party damage and equipment failures. Okay, well, that's interesting. Equipment failures. Equipment failures are typically not inside the integrity management program. When we developed integrity management protocols in ASME, it was really around threats that compromise the pipeline to rupture. Okay, cracking, geohazards, hard spots, corrosion, those kind of things. And if you read Section O, which was created directly out of ASME, it walks down, these are the threats your integrity management program should be managing. It doesn't say really anything about equipment failures, because those are typically managed through reliability and sustainability programs. Okay, that doesn't mean they're not managed, they're just not managing integrity management. And why are they flaring? And I picked that word on purpose, actually. Why are they here? Well, this represents the single biggest increase in incidents over the last 10 years, equipment failures. Okay, why? Well, I think Tristan kind of hit on that earlier. Why is because this is not a safety issue. Equipment failures aren't ruptures. They're discharges through a controlled device, a relief device typically. Okay, those aren't typical failures. What those are environmental issues. So now we've started tracking, in the interest of minimizing our environmental footprint, a whole new category of things. Rather than safety, we're now saying safety and the environment, which is great. Okay, this is just a change. We need to adapt. So when we adapt, we're starting to track new things we never tracked before. So we're starting to report incidents on releases through safety devices. Okay, it's not a rationalization why we don't want to do it. It's just a different animal. So integrity management isn't driving equipment issues. Those are different. They're mostly environmentally driven releases. And I think that this is just new data for us to digest. And so as we start to prioritize, now we're starting to consider in the prioritization schema of things to work on, environmental issues and safety issues. And you're just looking at what's the next best bang for the buck, so to speak? If society wants us to drop down, equipment failures so that we minimize our environmental footprint, okay, we will make that the next priority. But it won't, then we'll restack the prioritization scheme. And I think that's what's happening right now. And I think this environmental discussion is very timely and very important, but it's a significant change. And I think Tristan actually recognized that when you talk about this isn't how it used to be. No. When the gas pipeline systems were designed, they were designed to protect safety by relieving the gas through the environment, through these emergency shutdown devices that discharge the gas through a controlled device to the atmosphere. We don't want to do that anymore. Okay, well, that's just a change. So we have to go back and redesign these systems. We have to rethink how that's happening and what's driving some of these equipment failures that are causing those ESDs. But I think that's typically covered in other programs, and I think that's really important just to kind of keep that in mind as we look at is IM working or not, is what's IM covering.
Yeah, thanks, Andy, for that. That is clarifying, and we noticed that equipment failure and material failure all seem to take up any progress that was made in these other failures. Of course, I think that protecting the environment is safety, and that safety is protecting both people and the environment, and it's not a safety or environment, it is both. At what point did operators have to start reporting the 3 million cubic feet as incidents?
It's a great question. I think it was within the last 10 years that criteria changed. And that's some of what's driving this reporting uptick.
Yeah.
It's a new reporting criteria. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not arguing it. I think it's just a new area we have to adapt and start figuring out how to manage. And I agree with you. But the integrity management program, as it was originally constructed, really wasn't around this. We can adapt it to do that, but if we're compare apples and apples, that wasn't in the bucket when we started.
Great.
Yeah, from my perspective on the hazardous liquid transmission lines, I also think we're improving. When I look at the data, and we all look at the data differently, excuse me, from 2010 to 2022, we've actually had a reduction in the number of incidents that we've had. And that's not just incidents in general, that's also IPEs, which we talked about a little bit before, incidents impacting people or the environment, which is a big area we focus on with the help of the Pipeline Safety Trust around 2017 when we created that metric. But when you look at that and you say, you're doing better, well, how do you measure that? So I try to normalize that against the actual mileage data in the systems and say, as we look through this, we've actually increased the pipeline mileage roughly 47,000 miles since the same time period. So we've increased the mileage, we have less incidents, so something's working, right? And it's not perfect by any means, but when you start normalizing it to mileage, it does show a very positive trend. And we have data, right? So the data that we get and that we look at, just like everything else, like Andy was talking about, it breaks it down to different categories. And you can see over a 10-year period of where the industry has actually had reductions, some meaningful in some areas, but there's still some areas that we may have had an uptick, around 2014-ish, but now we're bringing it back down around corrosion specifically in the liquid space. And, as we go through and we look at this data, we say, so what? So how do we get it better? How do we fix it? That's where we use some of our industry trade groups, API, LIPA, the Performance Excellence Team, things like that to start really driving collaborative change on how we look at corrosion, the causes of corrosion, and what we do to mitigate it to keep everything inside the pipes. Internally to Plains, we have the same type of stuff that we look at, right? We have industry data sets, we have our data sets that we use, and we say, where are our problems, right? Because sometimes, like Andy was saying, there's variability. So we don't just want to compare ourselves to the industry to go to zero. We want to make sure we're going to zero. So we use that data to further drive internal programs to make sure we're focusing on stuff that we have challenges with as well.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. A couple things. When you say you're, making progress on incidents, is that Plains All-American or hazardous liquids in general?
So hazardous liquids in general, if you look at the data set that we have from the PHMSA database, it provides that we had 87 IPEs in 2010, and in 2022, we recorded 74 with the mileage change. So the data sets may be different, but it's the same data that we're using.
Yeah, no, this looks like similar data we're talking about, but, the trend line, while it shows just a very slight downgrade, it's not statistically significant. And so we don't have a positive trend
Well- What I would say to that, from how I view the data, is that when you normalize it against the mileage out there that's been included, it does show a positive indication.
And I understand from an operator's perspective why you would want to normalize that for mileage and internally think about that. But from the public's perspective, it doesn't really matter if incidents are going down per mile. We just don't want incidents. We want zero incidents. And so I understand from an engineering perspective, internally, how that's an important metric to you, but communicating to you from the public, letting you know that's not a meaningful metric to us. It is total incidents that are happening in our communities that matter.
Yeah, and we focus on all incidents, right? I mean, I'm without a doubt, and when I was looking at the data sets for this conversation, I was using these different metrics that we have. But we look at every incident, and we don't want any of them, right? There's no incident out there that's a good incident. We want every one to go to zero. The point of the data is actually driving where our effort goes to try to drive that down.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Yes, sir.
Jeff?
Okay, I'm representing the gas gathering industry sector, and to be respectful of one of the comments from the public this morning, I want to take a minute to explain what gas gathering is, because if I just jump into type A, B, C, and R, I may lose you. But a gas gathering pipeline function is literally taking gas from the well and then handing it off to a gas transmission pipeline. And these pipelines are typically smaller in diameter, shorter sections in length, and operate at lower pressures. So there are 4 different categories of gathering. Again, type A and B, which operate in a class 2, 3, or 4 HCA. And to add more terminology, class is based on population around the pipeline, and that defines how we can operate that pipeline in specific pressures. Type C and R pipelines are newly regulated since May of 22. They are in rural areas, low risk, and operate at lower pressures. So how are we performing from gas gathering? Type A and B have been in the regulation since 2006, and there's no real trend on this data. If you look at it, it looks like an EKG, but it is a low incident rate, and to build to your point, any incident is not good. But from 2022, or from 2010 to date, there's been 28 reportable incidents on type A and B gathering. Type C and R, which again are in the class 1 low-risk rural areas, they became regulated in May of 22. And between May of 22 and December, there were 19 type C incidents and 9 type R. So for 2023, up to date or last week, there were 19 type C reportable incidents and 15 type R. So there's not enough data out there to trend to the question, are we doing better? But these regulations, or these pipelines were brought into regulation to start trending data, because historically they have been not subject to the regulation. So the challenge was a lot from Pipeline Safety Trust and the public, and how are these pipelines operating and are they safe? So over the years, we'll be able to evaluate the trends and then to identify, do we need additional changes in the regulation?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And one thing I'll add, we are pleased that we will at least start having data on the type C and type R gathering lines. We've known that there have been fatalities from what are now type C pipelines, and so that we can now start tracking data. Information is good, and it'll be really interesting to see. But one thing that is clear from the data on gas gathering lines, not really trend-wise, but that really jumps out to a member of the public as they're looking at this, when you look at the cause of failures, by the different systems, what immediately jumps out is that gas gathering has a much, much higher cause of failure from corrosion. You know, it's 50% or higher of the failures on gas gathering are from corrosion, whereas it's much lower on the other systems, especially gas distribution. And so that, you know, that makes sense. It's this kind of raw, unprocessed gas that has some corrosive elements, but that is really alarming for the public to see such a high level of corrosion.
And that is one thing that was changed in the new regulation is the Type C, which are your larger diameter, 8-inch or greater gathering systems. There are corrosion mitigation requirements now in the regulation. So that is part of the new regulation that went into effect in May.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Brian.
I have a few slides. You know, when we talk about is pipeline safety improving coming at it from a gas distribution operator point of view, if you, can you go, yep, that's it right there. Perfect, thank you. So what you see on the slide there is two things. One, the amount of increase in mileage. So, and I understand normalization, and we can talk about that, but then you also see the graph that shows just the number of incidents from our gas distribution system, and you'll see a downward trend. And if you go to the next slide, you know, and it's quite a bit of increase in mileage. This is that normalized slide with a 54% reduction over the last 20 years. You know, I look at this as is it improving? Yes. Are we there yet? No. You know, it's a continual effort, continual work and improvement. You know, our commitment through the American Gas Association and all of the LDC companies, the distribution companies, is around pipeline safety management system. You know, that model is around plan, do, check, adjust. We're always trying to improve as we work to drive incidents out of our you know, really out of our system. If you go to the next slide, this one looks a little bit too at hazardous leak rate per mile of main, and you can see what that looks like. And an important point, if we go to the next slide, let's take out excavation damages. So if we look at, you know, going back to the first slide and the number of incidents, you know, the two highest number of incidents, causes of incidents on the gas distribution system are excavation damage and damage from vehicles. And so, you know, this slide here shows just a percentage in reduction over the last several years when we look at, you know, miles of main and as far as hazardous leaks when you take out excavation. So, you know, our focus very much internal to my company and as an industry on our pipeline safety management system, obviously our integrity programs, all the things that we are trying to do to drive these numbers down lower and lower and continue to improve year over year.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. You know, again, from the public perspective, and I understand why, as I mentioned before, why you would normalize for mileage to mark your own internal progress, why you would, you know, take out excavation to look at the causes that you have more direct control over. And I'm just going to reiterate from the public's perspective, we just want to see less incidents and not you know, normalizing per mile and taking out these other kinds of failures and things like that. And I also want to say, even when you've done that, seeing the 29% reduction, you know, that's over 10 years or so, and on an annual basis, that's, you know, the public's expecting to see some dramatic change. And we'll talk about this a little later in the discussion, like, how do we make a real meaningful difference on the amount of failures that we're seeing? I mean, we hear so much about ILI technology on some systems and all the R&D that's going in. What is going to be the system or the piece of technology that is finally going to make this meaningful difference? I mean, maybe we ask that now. What do you see as something that, without a doubt, is going to show, no matter how you look at the data, we are absolutely making progress?
when I look at it, I think I think broad statements are very dangerous. I think you're seeing good progress in some areas. I think you're seeing some learnings in other areas. I think I don't know that I have a silver bullet. I wish I did. I think it's a long journey. It's a complex journey. I think that as you start to look at where is certainty, and I think inside HCs is certainty. If you want to calibrate, are we making progress? You know, what is the scope of the integrity rule, and where is it absolutely required to be deployed? That's where certainty can be defined if we're making progress or not. I think there's a lot of progress as you talk about incidents on a broad scale. I think that you're seeing incidents outside of HCAs, so I think extending the integrity rule beyond HCAs is logical. I think that makes sense. I think a lot of operators deploy their systems, deploy their IM programs systematically, but not everybody. And that's where you're getting variability in performance. I think we need to look at some of the threats that don't have as mature as systems as around corrosion and some of the other tools. There's really, I mean, when you look at the maturity of an ILI tool, maturity of ILI tools on corrosion is extremely high. Okay, that's good. That means the confidence in the conclusions that we draw is high. And that's why you're seeing good performance where we deploy those tools. Other tools are new. Okay, well, they're vertically improving. And so those are places to put energy, either research or standardization. I think things like cracks. Cracks is probably somewhere in that middle part of the maturity curve. I think things like hard spots are vertically improving. You know, okay, so not all the tools are as mature, you know, and so we need to know that. So some of the threats are in a different part of that maturity curve and confidence intervals that you would draw from conclusions about how good things are. But I think silver bullets, I wish I had some, but I don't. But I do think extending integrity management beyond HCAs is important. I think developing industry standards and finding ways to get those standards to be required across the board is a confidence builder. I think using this data to help us to inform, particularly in the transmission sector and maybe the gas distribution side as well, is looking at this new challenge, as Tristan talked about, minimizing the environmental footprint on emissions. Okay, game on. Add that to the portfolio, but that's not typically inside the integrity management program. So, okay, that doesn't mean we don't do it. It just means it's an apple and a pear. So how do we deal with the pear? And then drive those programs. But they're different. And when we talk about it, I did want to say, when we talk about equipment failures, we're not talking about ruptures. We're talking about a piece of equipment that may come offline very quickly, like a turbine. The minute that thing comes offline, we have to manage the pressure in the station. So instantly, the station blows down. Instantly. That's not a safety issue, it's an environmental issue. And it was designed to protect. I understand we're different, I don't mean to be dicing words here, but it's not a rupture. And it's not something that typically managed in an IM program. So we don't put turbines inside the IM program. We need to figure out how to deal with the environmental footprint of an immediate shutdown differently, which is an adaptation. Fine. It's just a little different animal.
Yeah, thanks for that. And, you know, I appreciate the comment about the ILI on inspection being so mature, but, you know, we do a lot of analysis. Our data manager, James, who's in the room somewhere, puts a lot of this together when we go and speak before AMP each year and the corrosion professionals. And corrosion still is a leading cause. I think last year it was the second leading cause. And so not on gas transmission necessarily, but on all systems. And so here's a mature technology. Why are we still seeing so many failures on corrosion? And how does that give us hope that advancements in other technologies are going to lead to reductions in failures?
That's a great question to ask. That's a great note. And the question that follows is 5 whys. Why? Why was an ILI tool deployed on that pipe? Is that pipe even piggable? I mean, you get down to small diameter pipes, we can't get pigs in there. Okay, well, those are just good data points. It doesn't, but we have to be careful not to lump everything in a basket. That helps us make better choices, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with what Andy said. When you look at the general approach, we can do better, and that's why we have to focus on what we're doing. You know, where do you put your effort? How do you look at the data? Keep asking the questions to really drill in, why are you actually having the corrosion issues? And that's what we try to do through our safety management system. Plains calls that OMS, Operational Management System, to do that plan, do, check, adjust, plan, do, check, adjust process that Brian mentioned before. But, you know, I don't think there's a silver bullet either right now. I think what it is, it's a journey, just like Andy mentioned, right? It's going to keep taking time, keep asking the questions, asking the hard questions, looking at it from different perspectives, and keep really running it down.
And from a gas gathering perspective, again, to Andy's point, a lot of those lines aren't piggable or in the integrity management program. But overall, to answer the question, since enterprise, we've got it all, is we have to continue to invest in new technologies. Andy touched on it, and Matt, you know, corrosion releases keep going up. My question will be, is that on the pipeline or is that within the facilities that aren't subject to an integrity management program? And we currently don't have the technology to effectively inspect those pipes and all the various configurations within a facility. So to Andy's point, I think we do need to step back and see where are the releases. Integrity management programs are for long-haul pipelines in the right-of-way, and differentiate those from incidents within a facility. Where it's confined within an operator's property truly doesn't impact the public from a safety perspective.
You know, again, from the distribution operator standpoint, you know, I think what can we continue to do? Obviously, we've got, depending on the company, where you're located, different stages of, I'll call, legacy pipe replacement of what's going on with cast iron and bare steel main replacement. Obviously, continuing with our distribution integrity management programs. But I will say, I mean, I wouldn't call it a silver bullet, but I would call it a very important bullet for us is support with, you know, increasing the state regulations, I'll say consequences around excavation damage. If we can cut, you know, half the incidents, and you cut it in half with eliminating excavation damage, how do we help that? And you know, so I'll say stronger state programs around excavation damage and the consequences that come from that, I think is an important item for us to continue to focus on.
Yeah, and you know, we agree we need strong state programs to get after those excavation damage incidents and failures and tragedies. But we just, yeah, of course, operators can also work on the causes that are more under their direct control. I wanted to ask, you know, it's come up a few times here over the last couple days. You know, there's lots of studies out there showing the disproportionate impact and burden of oil and gas infrastructure on underserved communities and communities of color. There's several more specific studies that actually show the concentration of leaks and incidents on disproportionate from pipelines on underserved communities and communities of color. How do we move forward from here to make sure that those burdens and the risks and the threats of pipelines are shared more equitably among our communities?
Let's keep working down this
Yeah,
way. That's
can,
fine.
we can start at the other end and work down and switch
go
it up.
backwards this time?
Yeah.
Sure. All right, mix it up a little bit.
Mix it up a little bit.
And if we look funny at you in the audience, it's the lights. If anyone's been up here, this is like, whoa.
Yeah. They're very good.
It's like I don't see any faces in the crowd, so
And I just always
apologize.
look funny.
So, you know, I think to me we got to dig into the. Oh, thank you. They dimmed them down a little bit. So, we need to dig into the data. So, you know, we've seen some of those, obviously some of those reports, and I'll say we went just for my company. We went back and looked. There's other peer utilities of ours that we participate in committees with AGA and went and looked at the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, the CEJST tool, and looked at, because if it's a mapping and it shows areas, and then so we overlaid it. All right, let's overlay the mapping tool with where we've had any type of a pipeline safety event on our system to see if there's a correlation between the two, and we didn't see it. And I know some of our peers didn't see it as well. We also went and dug a little bit down and looked, not just there, we went to look, all right, let's look at our emergency response time. So if there's we get a call, I smell gas, we look at, all right, how long does it take us to get, out to respond and just to ensure that we are, because it's, staying consistent and being, within our, I'll say just consistent across our entirety of our system. What we saw there is generally it's just it's the distance from where our operating centers are to an event or a call is what it was ultimately what drives that. But I think digging into the data and continuing to understand, continuing to go after legacy pipe programs, all of that are things that I see are as important in the question that we have here, and that's my thoughts.
Okay, and so Brian, when you say you haven't found those correlations, are you talking specifically at Duke or the industry as a whole?
I'm saying I do. I haven't.
Sure.
I can't answer for everybody across the industry as a whole, but I know for our system and a few of our other peer utilities who've done that, they haven't seen a correlation as far as looking at significant pipeline events and the correlation with the CEJST.
And have you sought, some objective, independent, outside help or consulting on looking at that data?
We have not.
I would suggest that as, none of us like to believe we are doing that kind of harm. It's not conscious or directly intentional a lot of the times, and sometimes an independent analysis can be helpful and see things that it's hard for us to see.
Appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay, for one, we operate and maintain all of our pipeline systems in the same manner regardless of their location. So integrity management, emergency response, it's not dependent on any community where we operate. They're all managed the same. So one thing we've talked about the last several days is RP 1185, which I was a part of. And one thing we didn't talk about yesterday when Paige did it, you bring operators, public, and government to the table and expect that to be an easy process. It was not. I mean, we're 3 years into that, so it wasn't as easy as pouring milk out of a carton. So one of the topics was EJ, and we struggled to define that within 1185 because, environmental justice, it's hard to get your arms wrapped around. So one thing that we have developed in 1185 that I think will help industry is developing tools which were somewhat new to even identify the communities we operate that are classified as disadvantaged, because I think there's a lot of information out there, but there's not a one-stop shop to help operators identify exactly where those communities are. But 1185 is going to be a good tool in our toolbox to start reaching out to communities, community leaders, to get input from them, because a lot of these disadvantaged communities aren't the entire community. They could be pockets of where we operate. So we're going to need impact from the stakeholders that we identify in these engagement programs to help us do that.
From my perspective, I think it was Paul that was on the last panel that mentioned where these assets connect to, typically in industrialized areas and things like that. And around those areas, there may be larger pockets of communities that are impacted. Oh, sorry. So there may be larger pockets of where these, communities may be impacted. And what we look at, going through, as an industry now is broader stakeholder engagement, right? 1185 is going to be a lot of help. We're looking with a strategic goal with the Performance Excellence Team, API LIPA, to go and do more stakeholder engagements to understand the impacts of this and see how it does actually impact the communities there. I will say that, there's a pipeline 20 feet off my back fence of where I live. Me and my sons use that as the area we play catch with, either a football or baseball typically. But there's pipelines everywhere, and we know that they do impact some communities differently, so we're looking into that. And the first step, as Jeff mentioned, is really getting involved with stakeholder engagement better than we've done in the past to understand those impacts.
Thanks, Matt. I think that some of the others have said, what we do as a company is interesting, but perhaps not compelling to everybody here because you experience other operators. We deploy our integrity management program systematically. So same as Jeff, we deploy the same integrity programs everywhere, inside HCAs, outside, all the way to LCAs, everywhere. So when I look at EJ, we're taking EJ, the EPA EJ screening tool, and passing our system through that to see if it looks at it differently. And what we're seeing in that first screening is really, and I think this is probably going to be a trend that is worth following up on, frankly, and that is, when you look at it from a physical safety standpoint, it's really not that different, not finding a lot of disparity, but I think it would be worthwhile to look at it through the lens of HCAs versus EJ. See that, because I think that will be where you can get a sense of, is the integrity rule as deployed in HCAs helping level that in EJ? And then when there's EJ areas beyond HCAs, okay, well that could be cause and could help us inform where's the next logical place to expand integrity management. But I think, PHMSA's maturity on safety rules would probably help level that a little bit. But I think it would be very interesting to me to layer that information down over the environmental driven incidents. I think you will see that's new, and I think you may see we got some work to do here. And I think that really informs this and the choices, but I think that that'd be a curious mind would just want to know the answer to that. I'd like to see, let's lay those things over and see how that informs our next decisions.
Yeah, thanks. That's a continuing conversation that will hopefully remain a high priority for everybody. I will say, to some of the, other operators that are in the room here as well, often we'll hear, well, we treat all communities the same, and so, but when we see these studies come out showing that disproportionate impact, you can't continue to attempt to treat all communities the same and expect that to correct, and there has to be some mitigative action. So, the last question before we go to the audience is, it's kind of a big question, but let's try to keep it a little tight so we have time for audience questions. But what do you all see as the public's role in pipeline safety? Any order you'd like.
Go this way again.
Go back the other way, or you want me to start?
Doing the wave.
I think that the public has a really important role. I think you see these things affect you directly, and I think that having these kind of forums is really helpful, and I hope what people are hearing here is we're not saying we're good enough or that we're done. What we're saying is we're trying to digest a lot of information, including input from you, to try to prioritize and start working down where we offer the biggest bang for the buck. That's risk management. What's the next biggest thing we can do to move the needle? What is it? And what is concerning to you as the public is huge to inform those decisions in that process. And I think that's what this forum is really valuable for, is, okay, I see this data this way. How do you see this data? What is it, and how do you weigh it? I think the other thing that's really important is the public to understand how that process works. Like we talked about, PHMSA's got an overarching requirement that, okay, don't let anything bad happen. All right, well, that's interesting, but not terribly helpful because it doesn't give a lot of detail. So you get a lot of variability in performance. So how do you improve that clarity and certainty? Okay, so some pick that up and start doing things with it, but they can't require everybody to do it. And I think that's where the public can weigh in, is like, well, there's a standard on how to do this. It's just not deployed by everybody. So we want to hold people accountable to that standard, because that at least is best practice and has some certainty around what kind of performance it's going to yield. And I think that's a huge role for the public. I really do. And I'm not trying to advocate for, that PHMSA is not doing it right or wrong. I don't know how all has to be regulated, but I do think that the public has a role to say, we're worried about this threat. Is there or is there not a standard and clarity on how to do this more clearly to help level the playing field and clarify the performance standards? And then how do we get that broadly applied? and I think the public has a role in that.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with Andy. I think the public has a very large role as well. When you look at where our assets operate and who we impact, you know, we all want safe pipelines. That's why we're here. That's why we're talking with y'all. But it is, once again, what's your perspective? What are you guys seeing that we need to look at that we may not be seeing, right? We do have our own lens that we look at the data through, as Bill and I were bantering about earlier, right? You know, we look at this, you look at that, but what's important to y'all? And this is a great forum to get that kind of information and understanding so we can go back and make sure we're doing better. And it's also another good place for y'all to hold us accountable, right? I mean, we're here because we want to be here and be a part of this, right? We're engaging right now with y'all. And we could be sitting back in our offices and saying, oh man, the Pipeline Safety Trust is having another, but we're not, we're here. We want to be here. We want your information and your feedback, and we actively pursue it. You know, as we look at stakeholder engagement and doing that, I think there is 1185, as we've hit it on it a couple different times, is going to really drive the industry to start being better at this. You know, we don't just talk with the landowners, right? I mean, there's a lot of landowner talk today. You know, it's everyone that's impacted, right? It's the local communities. It's making sure the volunteer fire departments in rural towns have the right equipment to go off, and if they do have an incident, they can respond to it. I think it's a lot of that stuff as well that we have to do. So the public is very important, and we're very accountable to them.
And I agree with both what Andy and Matt said, so I won't be repetitive, but I'll add something. You know, Tristan touched on it this morning. This is key that the public can help is excavation damage is still one of our biggest threats on pipelines. So always call 811 if you're conducting any excavation. You know, fence work drives up our excavation damage stats. You know, don't minimize the work you're doing on the damage you could do to a buried utility. Operators, you also live where our pipelines are, so be aware of any suspicious activity that's going on around an above-ground pertinence, a valve station, a compressor station. If it doesn't look right, call the operator or call 911. It's better than driving by and then the next morning going, man, I thought that looked funny. Communication, you know, we send out mailers every year. Well, we do. It's required every 2 years to the affected public. Don't throw them away. There's a lot of good information in it that is to help you as the public identify something that may not be right. You know, a release of a product, recognize, you know, vapor cloud, call the operator, call 911, but don't just throw it away, read it, but communicate with the operators if something looks suspicious, and always call 811.
I really don't have much more to add outside of what was said. I mean, I agree with the stakeholder engagement comment that's critically important. If you smell gas, call. I mean, I think we've probably heard of incidents where someone thought they smelled gas and didn't call in, and then a day or two later something bad happens, right? So that's just added on to the call 811. And I'll throw another one out, and it's hard to do, but if you see someone digging and you don't see paint on the ground, markers on the ground, it's always hard for folks to challenge someone doing work, but you can just call 811 if you see something like that. But all of those things are an opportunity to prevent a damage from happening, prevent an event from happening. So just a little added there.
Okay, I think we're time for some audience questions.
Thanks, Bill. We actually have some questions from, if you all remember, we have an online form. So we've gotten a question through there that we wanted to start out with, if that's okay. So the question is for you, Mr. Drake. The question is, recently at a petroleum conference, Enbridge leaders discussed Enbridge's hard target of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and its commitment to lowering emissions while meeting a growing energy demand. Can you discuss some of the avenues that Enbridge is using to accomplish these goals and whether those actions can be replicated across the industry?
Sure. A great question. I think that one of the things that we do, again, back to data, what's driving emissions releases. And I think that one of the things that we find is that the blowdowns of the pipeline are probably the leading cause of emissions by volume. It's really not leaks on the transmission system. That's we operate above the leak rupture threshold, it would be very dangerous to be waiting for leaks to be managed. That's too late. So leak volumes on trenches is very low typically. It's typically blowdowns that drive them. So then the question is, why? You know, the 5 why questions. Why do you do that? Why? What's causing that? A lot of that has to do with maintenance. A lot of that has to do with the relief devices that are designed to exhaust the gas in the event of a safety event. So one is we're trying to find alternative technologies to blowing down the pipe. So one is pull down the pipe, which takes time, but that's one of the things we're doing, and we're making great progress. I think we're 30% reduced already on emissions over the last couple of years, just on that front. Then it's to go down and look at gas-actuated equipment, okay? So valve operators have historically been driven by gas. So they blow the gas through a valve actuator, it spins it and drives the actuator closed, close the valve. All right, well, that was back before. Said back to Tristan's point about things have changed. That's not how it used to be. Well, that's okay. That's a different design we have to change. So we're eradicating those gas-driven valve actuators from the system using electronics and other technologies. And I think, you know, the third is better deployment of technologies, including how we handle ESDs in the station through, you know, machine learning and better monitoring in the station, sectional isolation in the station, not complete station blowdowns, which now high-speed computers can figure out where problems are based on sensors. And so those kind of things are the things that we're doing to reduce those. And they've been making great progress so far.
Good morning. I'm Jamie Manti. I'm the president of a local union that represents a utility workforce of about 1,500 in northern Indiana. We have a contingency here of about 6 of us, welders, gas controllers, system operators, with a lot of experience of responding to emergencies in the field, leaks, dig-ins, whatnot. I think this question is mainly for Brian, I would guess. I'm curious about how Duke and some of the other companies that you collaborate with are looking at the Pipes Act as it relates to not only safety of the public, but how the companies are preparing in anticipation of the rule for how they're going to manage the workforce. Do you anticipate a need for more workers? And I say that in the background of this. Our workforce is serious about safety. It's ingrained in us. Our motto at our local union is protecting life and property since 1943. And so I just really want to know what the operators in the industry are thinking in anticipation of how it's going to affect the workforce and their personal safety, them helping to protect the public, because we're working a lot of hours as it is. We feel stretched. So just want to get your take on that. And then one additional little piece of feedback for everybody here that's in the public. It's absolutely true that damages are probably the lowest hanging fruit, in my opinion, of being able to stop incidents. I know there's still a great responsibility from the companies to maintain and build their pipelines correctly. But some states don't even fine people for excavating into our lines and not calling 811. And some states don't even mandate that excavators call a one-call line. So that, to me, is some low-hanging fruit that the public could really lobby their states to get done, because we saw an immediate drop in Indiana when the dig law came through and people started getting fined for dig-ins. So question and feedback, but I appreciate the answer you could give. Thanks.
I think from a workforce standpoint, there's definitely, for us, probably, we just like similar for you, it's a tight labor market, right? And so continuing to attract employees, I would say our craft employees feel the same passion as you. When we talk, it's people, it's safety, people, and pipeline. It's what we do, and that's the mantra for our crews. And I think there's definitely, so if we look at, I'm thinking when you're talking about Pipes Act, maybe you're talking like the LDAR, leak detection and repair rule, and that definitely has the potential for increasing workload. And so it's something we're going to have to continue to evaluate. How do we bring in the talent and skill set? I would say, and also the diverse skill set that we bring in to help us continue to drive excellence in our operations. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question or not, but it's a challenge that we all have, that we're going to continue to have in the weeks, days, months, and years ahead as we continue to operate in a safe manner and a better manner. I think it will be a challenge for us to continue to bring in the appropriate skill set. And I appreciate the question, because I think it's something that it's and it's not just this industry, but other industries as well.
We'll go to this side of the room, if that's okay.
Hello, my name is Maria Dunn, and I want to say to the people who consider themselves members of the public here that we are all members of the public. And just before this session, I heard some people who had been sitting down the road from me, not these folks, other people, who said, "We're going to leave now. Let's all walk out on them." And so thank you for staying, because I'm also part of industry, and I think what you've heard from my colleagues of how hard we work to keep everything in the pipe, to be safe for ourselves and our communities, and to be great environmental stewards. So thank you for staying, because we've been here for 2 days, and we really value hearing from you too. So thank you for listening to us, the operators.
Hello, I'm Greg Perry with Pennsylvania Farm Bureau. I would love to talk about corrosion because I'm also a corrosion engineer, but of a career of over 30 years, I've been on site for so many pipeline excavations. It's just incredible. And I have seen, and I've been present for a line strike and a line strike with release. But over the last, I guess, 10 years or so, I've seen an increase in emphasis for the 811 and states improving or increasing their requirements and increasing their outreach. But yet still, the excavation damage is still such a high factor. Are we tracking whether excavation releases include lines that are marked out or not marked out? Because I think that might be a big factor in ways that we can find out improvement. In other words, is it a compliance issue, or is it a the mark out and making sure that there's accurate location?
I can try to answer that. I mentioned I'm on CGA, which is Common Ground Alliance, and that entire organization is focused on excavation damage to all buried utilities, not just pipelines. So to answer your question, yes, those are tracked. We submit what we call dirt reports to CGA, and they track that overall for excavators. To trend, how do we get that number down? So it is tracked. I couldn't tell you what that number is, but it is tracked.
Not calling before digging surveyors.
Yes, not calling before digging is also a big one. And that's what, 811 years ago, we saw significant improvement in that. Now we're in that last percentage of, we're focused on how do we change that behavior. So we're changing how we do communications. We've got the mail out. One is specific to excavators. So we've got different technologies now we're using. We've tried geofencing with, your iPhones. We've got better participation from, various equipment rental companies that will put call 811 stickers on the side of the equipment when they call. So it is a movement to try to help drive that down, but it's a work in progress.
I'll throw in one thought that came up yesterday in a presentation. I think it was your all's data. What I thought was really informative was, if break this down by state, because these states are that these programs on damage prevention are deployed by the states. And if you look at how mature each of the different states are, I think you see a lot of variability. Some states, I remember Connecticut, and I think Pennsylvania and others were very high in maturity. Other states didn't even have a color on the circle that was showing how mature their program was. That's very relevant to your question, is the variability between states and how they're deployed. So I think that's just an ever, as you said, this is a journey. We've got to keep pushing people to mature and grow. Some are way down the curve, some are not even in the room.
Who's next?
Hello. I'm a community member of Van Horn, Texas. We're about to get a 48-inch, 155-mile-long natural gas line in my backyard, 0.1 miles from literally my backyard, a mile from a school in a rural community of less than 2,000 people, where we do not have a trauma center near us. Just 2 months ago, there was a fatal accident involving 4 young boys. It took an hour for those kids to get help. They were my children. I want to look you in the face. Well, I'm here to go back, tell my community whether I should warn them about what's coming our way, or if I should reassure them. And over the past 24 hours, I've heard a lot of talking, but nobody's saying anything. And what I've noticed is that we're not a community, we're not anything, and I know you guys just recently said that you go to communities. I don't believe that, because there's a lot of public members here that weren't reached out before you come, and especially my community hasn't been reached out and told a pipeline is coming. So I know there hasn't been any research or data or anything going on why this is coming, and I don't believe your companies do that before they arrive, because I'm living that. But also, I want to go back to them and let them know that maybe we'll be safe. So with your cumulative years of experience, can you look me in the eye and tell me that I can go home and tell my boys that they will be safe with this pipeline in my backyard? Or are we going to come to the conference next year and I'm going to be one of those numbers on the data charts, just like the rest of the pipeline communities were? And that is my question.
I appreciate the personal nature of that question, and I appreciate the emotion and the energy in it. And to say, don't worry, would be inappropriate, frankly. I think the answer to your question, I think, lies in the intensity that particularly the regulator takes in this, because we talked a lot about there's people up here that are doing all kind of things, but it's not deployed consistently across the industry. Okay, that creates variability and risk. The regulator steps in and provides that platform of certainty to the public. And I'm not trying to skirt the issue about our accountability, but I think just recognizing the obvious. And I think the regulator is very mature in the integrity discussions, particularly on new pipeline construction. Routing's a little different animal, how they get so close to things. Okay, let's park that conversation as a separate thing. That's really not a PHMSA thing. That's more of a FERC siting issue. But on safety, I do think there is a lot of maturity in that conversation. And I do think there's a lot of certainty that you can glean by asking specific questions about what is that pipeline doing about integrity, whether that's testing the pipe prior to installation, depth of cover, what kind of tools will they be running in the tool. Those are great questions to ask in a public forum that would build confidence in your question and your boys' safety.
Yeah, I want to really thank you for your question and for being here and speaking up. And I just want to offer up our organization, the Pipeline Safety Trust, as a resource to you. Find any of us with the purple ribbon. I will try to look for you. And we can work on talking about, communicating risk is complicated, and we can try to walk you through that. We can try to educate you on, and anyone in your community on the important ways you can advocate for yourself to keep you and your boys safe. Maybe, do we have time for one more question? Or no? Yeah. One last question.
All right, if you guys ever watched The Lone Ranger, you remember it was Jay Silverheels that always had common sense solutions to the problems and these silver bullets upon which you speak. So what I've done is gone upstream, and I appreciate Enbridge, Kinder Morgan, WBI. They allowed me to have the dialogue and insist that those pipes were built safer to our standards, not PHMSA or anybody else. They went above and beyond by having that dialogue. And within our reservation, we took 1.3 million gallons spilled, and that's when we weren't doing our own oversight, and we took it down to 0 gallons by these silver bullets. So what we've requested is greater wall thickness, hydrology studies, larger diameter pipes so you have lower operating pressure, HDD boring in areas of concerns like slope risk, water, increase smart pigging. When you're talking about corrosion, you don't have to do it every 7 years, do it every year until you establish a baseline and see there is no risk. There's no anomalies. We also had quality pipe, North American steel. Don't be bringing in this Chinese pipe. You know, bring in quality North American pipe and invest in communities. So one of our local gathering groups, Marathon, they donated gas monitors to all local responders. So there's a lot you can do, but these are just some of the things.
I think that's great. And that's what at Plains we try to do, right? Invest in the community, work with you. You know, we actually do look at all the geotechnical risks when we lay pipes and things like that. It's not when we site pipes that we just go and put them wherever. There's actually lots of studies, and unfortunately, I haven't found the program yet to do that. So we actually use a lot of outside consultants as we do that too. So I appreciate the comment, and that's what I think all the operators on this panel try to do.
Yeah, so thanks, everybody. Thank you to the panel. I want to thank everybody in the room and everybody who had to leave early. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for leaning into difficult conversations. You do all inspire me. There is a QR code, if you could put it up, for our survey. We'd love to hear how we could be better next year, what maybe we got right. Please don't ever hesitate to reach out to the Pipeline Safety Trust if we can be a resource to anybody. And I hope to see all of you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.